So today I'm going to be ranking every single boss in the new Elden Ring DLC from worst to best. I won't include base game bosses, reskins or repeats of the same boss. This is also my personal list, so let me know down in the comments below what your favorite boss is. In last place we have Count Ymir. I was probably over leveled for this fight, but the fight with this protector, which is not part of the actual boss fight, is actually better than the boss fight itself with Ymir. The only thing he does is spawn the small finger enemies that don't pose any threat whatsoever, and he goes down so fast that I can't even consider it a proper boss fight, but he has a health bar, so it counts. Next up is Lamenter. This is one of those bosses like Pinwheel or the Fool's Idol where they spawn clones of themselves and you need to find the original one, which is the only one that takes damage, but this fight is really easy and is over very quickly and it's not hard at all. In 28th is the Chief Blood Fiend, and this boss fight is just an amped up Blood Fiend, but the run to this boss is actually harder than the boss itself. You can also find this enemy in a cave somewhere in the open world, so that makes this fight super forgettable. The boss itself doesn't have any noteworthy moves, with most of them being just the moves from the smaller non-boss versions of him. 27th is the Ghost Flame Dragon. This is basically your standard dragon boss fight with a small twist, and that's the fact that his attacks still frost build up, but apart from his unique looks, this boss doesn't add anything significant to your standard dragon boss fight. Next up is Black Knight Garu, and this is the Black Knight if he was freaky, as he has a tongue attack that licks you if you don't dodge it properly. Other than that, this shouldn't really be considered as a boss, as it doesn't offer anything else that a normal Black Knight doesn't have. Rakshasa is in 25. And this fight might be pretty decent if it wasn't for one attack that she keeps spamming over and over again. And that's her annoying double slice move. This attack deals massive damage and seemingly can go on for an infinite amount of time, as I've seen her do it 5 times at least without stopping. And while she's doing this move, she has hyper armor, so forget stunning her out of this move. And prepare to be seeing this move a lot. Apart from that one annoying move, she's really nothing special from your standard NPC fight. 24th place goes to the Curseblade Labyrinth, and on paper this is just an enemy classed as a boss, which I never really liked that much, but I do think the arena going black is a good way to change up the fight. But because the arena is dark throughout the entire fight, it can be quite challenging to see what's going on, so it's quite tricky to know when to dodge and when to attack. In 23rd is the second Black Knight, this time being Black Knight Erdtree. This fight is pretty straightforward, as it's just a pumped up Black Knight with a couple of different attacks, and his flying attacks are pretty fun to dodge, and overall I think this boss changes up the flow enough to warrant the inclusion on this list. Dancer of Rana is next, and this is a decent NPC fight with some fire attacks and some fairly easy but still dangerous sword moves. This is one of those okay NPC fights you will probably only do if you want to use her armor or weapon. I do think this boss benefits from her magic attacks a lot, and otherwise she would be pretty lame. Now at place 21 with Dryleaf Dane. This is also where we start getting into some pretty good bosses, and Dryleaf Dane is a perfect example of this. His kung fu isn't really that effective if you have a weapon that staggers constantly, but he can be a little more dangerous once he starts doing his flying kicks or magic attacks that deal massive damage. I think this is a perfect introduction for the kung fu weapon and showcases its moves pretty well. Now we enter the top 20 with the Red Bear. This fight is similar like Dryleaf Dane's fight in a way that he mainly showcases his new weapon, his claws, but similarly to Dryleaf Dane, he's not really effective with them. He doesn't get staggered as often, however, so the fight becomes a little more challenging, as once he starts attacking you, there's not really a way to stop him. I do like his moveset a little bit more than Dryleaf Dane, so that's why he goes above him. In 19th is the first boss you will most likely face with the Black Jail Knight. At the start you might think that his machine gun crossbow is the biggest threat, but it's actually not. It's actually his windsword slashes that are the most deadly, and for me personally it was a great wake-up call, as I thought I would just walk through this entire DLC. But this guy beat my ass for a couple of times before I got the feel of the game again. After that we have the first Remembrance boss with Commander Gaius, and I have to be honest, I'm so tired of these horseback boss fights, as they're not enjoyable and can be super frustrating. I don't like to fight on horseback, and in this boss fight it's not even a viable option, as Gaius can just chase you down the entire fight and it becomes pretty useless to be on torrent. Apart from that, most of its attacks are pretty well balanced, apart from his charge attack that has a broken hitbox and the dodge window is way too tight, and if you dodge early, for some reason the attack does double damage. The other kind of BS attack is his spin in the air, where he comes down with some spikes in the ground, and if you don't dodge and stand right in front of him, you will always take damage. Those things aside, I think this boss is decent and pretty well telegraphed, but in my opinion it's by far the worst Remembrance boss. In 17th is the Gang Trio, and this is technically not a boss fight, but I'm gonna include it anyways as I think it's worth mentioning. Going into this fight, I thought I could just do it without summoning, only to get my ass beat by the most aggressive NPCs I ever fought. This is one of those fights that really requires you to summon NPCs or your own spirits, as otherwise the fight is almost impossible. And if you do summon, this fight becomes a lot more manageable and actually pretty enjoyable. But if you don't summon, expect to be triple ganked by 3 NPCs at the same time that all have a similar moveset, unlike what you would expect from the more balanced versions in other Souls games like the Dark Souls 2 fight that balanced it by having a guy who spammed range attacks instead of also running straight at you. In 16th is the last human-like enemy with the Ancient Dragon Man. This guy has one of the coolest attack moves, as he has this blood sword slash and 2 different dragon attacks. One where he spews lava on the ground and one where he has this massive dragon head. These attacks are pretty easy to dodge, but they hit like a truck if you do get hit by them. The best thing with this fight is also the sword that he drops when you kill him, which is a really great weapon against dragons and another boss later in this list. Now we enter the top 15 with Sword Master Ons. On the surface, this guy looks like a piece of cake, but if you aren't prepared properly, he can humble you really quickly with some of his attacks. He has this invisibility move where he tries and catch you off guard, but it's mainly his quick attacks where he can really get you killed fast. His frost buildup is no joke either, as it's really something you have to look out for when you fight him, as it can creep on you really fast, and in combination with his quick moves, you really shouldn't underestimate this guy. Number 14. Yori the Elder Inquisitor. This fight, like the previous one, can humble you really quickly, as it looks just like a basic enemy you fought countless times before, but she has some really deadly moves. She can spawn her big sister that spins at you, while her smaller clones also spit fire at you, which can get you killed quickly. Another one of her moves that can be annoying is a move where she spawns these holy blasts behind you, but she usually only uses this move on its own, and it's super easy to dodge if you're not standing still. Typically, I don't really like mage type bosses, but this one isn't that bad. In 13 is the Golden Hippopotamus. I don't love this boss as much as I wanted to, as I do think it feels kind of underwhelming. He does have some tricky to dodge attacks, and especially his charge grab, I never quite got the timing fully right. He also jumps and runs away a lot, so it becomes a fight where you are chasing him quite often, which is just not that entertaining. In the second phase, where he grows the golden spikes, it becomes a challenge to actually properly see what attacks he's doing, leading to some confusing hits. But the second phase does feel a little bit easier, as most of the new attacks he gets are not that difficult to avoid anyways. Number 12. Promised Consort Radahn. Okay, this is one we need a serious discussion about. This fight has to be the hardest boss I ever fought, but not only because of the fight itself, but he not only destroys me, but my PC as well. He has an attack that genuinely drops my frame rate to 3 frames per second, and he literally becomes impossible to beat, as I'm unable to dodge any part of the attack and these follow-ups. Apart from my technical issues, this boss is really great, and I love most of the first phase, but in the second phase is where it starts to lose me a little bit, with the pure length and damage of his attacks. This boss borders on the line of being so difficult to the point where it starts to take away from the fight instead of adding to it. And this is also one of my only complaints with the DLC, and that's just that the boss openings are too short, as with some of the bosses I can't use the weapons that I want because they're just too slow to swing, and you will get hit no matter what if you try to punish the given openings. So it feels like you are required for some bosses to change your build in order to be successful. I do think Radahn is supposed to be super difficult, and I'm all for it, but there are a couple of attacks that are just not fun, like his gravity pool, for example, that it's really difficult to dodge, and you would think that he would only use it for longer ranges to pull you in, but he can even do it when you're right in front of him, which is frustrating to say the least. He does have a lot of other moves in his first phase that you can learn fairly quickly, but in his second phase is where this is all getting thrown out the window. I really wanted to put this fight higher than this, but I just can't. I don't enjoy it as much much as some of the other bosses that are coming up next. The giant red bears that roam the open world are in 11th. And these are really fun fights and a unique twist on the basic bear boss in the base game, with them being able to use some ground pound attacks that change the dynamics of the fight quite drastically. The bears are also in pretty secluded places, so even though you fight them in the open world and you would think that there would be some other enemies disturbing the fight, that doesn't really happen. These bears are no pushover at all and are pretty challenging and can deal massive damage. If you aren't properly prepared or don't have enough Erdtree fragments, these bears are no joke at all and you will get humbled by them. Number 10 goes to Mediocre, Mother of Fingers. And apart from creeping me out with its looks, this is a well-balanced boss fight, with the hardest part of the fight being the delayed attacks. With most other boss fights, being at the side is a great strategy, but not with this one, as the fingers on the side of her can attack you too. She can also spawn the little finger enemies, and while you could think that they would be pretty annoying, they're not really that bad and can be one-shotted if you have the right damage. In phase 2 the fight becomes a little more intense, as now there are a couple of new attacks that are more dangerous, like the black hole attack. She also gets a spin in the air move that is really difficult to get the timing down of. This is an interesting and really unique fight, and it also is very balanced, so this is one of my favorites. I do also like the aesthetic of the boss and the arena. It's quite unique and gives me a Bloodborne feel that I really love. In number 9 is the Death Knight, which looks like a pushover boss at the end of a pretty dull dungeon. But this guy slaps hard. Quite literally. He looks dope and has some great attacks. But the one he always got me with was his grab attack, where he lifesteals a giant portion of HP, and if you do get hit by this one, it's an even worse feeling than just dying, as you just see all of your hard work disappear in front of your eyes. His lightning attacks are pretty well telegraphed and not impossible to dodge, but still really difficult though. This might be a weird one to put as high as I did, but I really love this fight and I do think it's the second best non-remembers boss fight. Number 8 goes to the Erdtree avatar. I did this boss quite late into my playthrough, so my level might have been a little bit higher than it's supposed to be, but still, don't underestimate this fight at all, as if you're not careful enough, you can easily be caught by one of its weirdly timed attacks. This is also surprisingly the only boss fight in the DLC with multiple health bars, as it respawns 2 times and gets a couple of new attacks each time. You can, however, will attack it when you depleted its HP before it fully dies, for the next phase to have about a third of its HP depleted. My only real complaint with this boss fight is in the third phase it gets an explosion attack that I never really got the timing down of, but that's a skill issue I guess. I do think this boss is very balanced and both the arena and the boss design are very unique. At number 7 is a putrescent knight, and while you might think that because he's on his horse he might sprint around the arena quite often, but he doesn't really do it that often compared to some other bosses in the DLC. I've heard quite a lot of people complaining about his big combo where you have to dodge him as well as his horse separately, but I don't mind it at all. It's not that hard to dodge, and if you do dodge it completely, there is a pretty good opening to punish and deal some serious damage. In his second phase he does get a couple of frostfire attacks, which are not the easiest to dodge, but it does change the fight up quite nicely in my opinion. I do personally really like his design, and his arena is just mwah, chef's kiss. So visually pleasing. Number 6 goes to Relana, and this was the boss where I thought I ain't built for this DLC. And I would say that once you get her moveset down, it becomes a simple fight, but that's not true at all, as it feels like she never stops her combos, but with enough perseverance you can get through it. Only to get to the second phase where she gets some insane fire and magic attacks that deal massive damage and can be super difficult to avoid. I do think they might have gone a little bit too wild with this boss for how early into the DLC it is, but if you do go around the map and look for some more Erdtree fragments, she does become a little bit more manageable, but it's still super challenging, as it's really difficult to find openings to punish her, with some moves seeming like they never end. She feels like they combine both Malenia and Pontiff into one boss, as some of her quick moves remind me of Malenia, and the second phase has a resemblance of Pontiff from Dark Souls 3. Now we enter the top 5 with Romina, Saint of the Bud. The reason I put her this high is because she's a big breath of fresh air. After all the bosses within insanely long attack strings and short openings. She brings a more thought out moveset with some big punish windows and isn't the insane optimization fight like some other ones in the DLC. She does have some attacks that deal Scarlet Rot buildup, but I don't mind it as she doesn't build it up that fast and only certain attacks deal Rot buildup. I do also really like the design of this boss, and this counts for a lot of other bosses as well, but I do really like the vibrancy of all the bosses and arenas in this DLC. Her moveset includes some attacks that aren't easy to dodge, but she does always have openings after them, so you get the chance to heal or deal damage after her attacks, which is something a couple of bosses lack. I do personally think this is one of the most balanced bosses in the DLC, and that's why I like her so much. Number 4 goes to the Dancing Lion, and I can't help but laugh at the design of this boss, as it's just two guys in a suit pretending to be a lion. There are a couple of attacks that at first are pretty difficult to read what they do, but when you do get it down, this fight becomes really satisfying and fun. I do think this boss shines way more in the second phase, where he gets lightning, ice and wind attacks. They all feel kind of familiar, but have some different timings and follow-ups to throw you off just a little bit. My biggest issue with this fight has to be the camera though. A lot of times when the lion goes in the air or gets close to you, it becomes difficult to see what's happening and anticipate what attacks will follow. Also, his lightning phase is by far the most frustrating one, as the random lightning bolts can be a little bit annoying to deal with, but don't get me wrong, everything else about this fight is near perfect and super fun to learn. Now we enter the top 3 with Mesmer. This fight is almost flawless in every single aspect in my opinion, with the only thing bothering me being the big snake attack he can do in phase 2, which just goes on for a little bit too long in my opinion. It also has some weird hitboxes which can be a little bit frustrating, but apart from that, this fight has it all. From some long attack strings that fully cover the entire arena, and with the massive change of phase 2, this fight just doesn't disappoint in any way at all. Mesmer will absolutely punish you if you are not prepared with all of his different moves and timings throughout the fight. I've heard a bunch of people saying that he just never stops attacking, and it might be because of my build at the time, but I never really had the issue, as I thought he had plenty of openings to punish in between his moves, and if you get close to him, he actually misses quite a lot of his attacks. In phase 2 it might be more challenging to actually find a proper opening, but he still has some pretty big openings, and his phase change cutscene is one of the coolest I've ever seen, with him crushing his own eyeball. It's just so dope. In second place I put Midra. Now hear me out, this is one of the easiest remembrance bosses in the game, but I really like this fight purely because it's really balanced. This boss offers way more than just a 6-hit combo with delayed attacks and a 0.5 second punish window, but if that's what you're looking for in a boss, then I get why you wouldn't put it this high. I did feel like I might have been a little bit over leveled, as this was one of the last bosses I fought, so I might not have gotten the full boss experience. But don't get me wrong, this boss is not a pushover at all, and there's still a big threat with this fight, as the madness buildup can stun you or just straight up kill you, but if you dodge the madness inflicting type of attacks, you can avoid the madness buildup pretty easily in my opinion. I did think the first phase was a little bit useless after the first time you fought him, as you will never get hit by him and it's really not that engaging, but I do get for a spectacle it needs to be there. And once you get past it to the second phase and even third phase, the fight becomes just absolutely fantastic. So at number 1 is no other than Bale the Dread. This has to be the best dragon fight that FromSoft has ever made. This is also one of the only fights that really benefits from summoning, as just hearing every time you summon him is just so funny. If you do have the Ancient Dragon Man's sword, I do recommend using it, as it's super strong against dragons, so Bale is the perfect boss to use this weapon on. It makes this fight a whole lot easier, but still it's not an easy fight at all, with him having some hard to read moves but also easier ones, but if you do mess up once you will take some serious damage. It's in his second phase that this fight becomes truly next level, with him going absolutely crazy and becoming much more mobile by getting wings and even more insane attacks. This fight, first couple of times you try it, you will feel like it's impossible, but it's a fight you can actually learn fairly quickly, and it always feels like you start improving every time time you face him. Like a lot of other dragon boss fights, this boss does have the moving head issue, as I like to call it, as the head of the dragon is almost always the weak spot, but it moves a lot, so it's often difficult to hit him there, as he can move it to start his next attack right before you want to hit him. Camera can be against you sometimes during this fight, but it doesn't happen that often, as the arena is really big. If you did enjoy this video and want to see me rank every single Remembrance boss, including the DLC, drop a like and subscribe, and go check out this video where I ranked every single FromSoft game.